Good morning, everyone. Today is Friday, April 24th, and we're just going to jump right in. I've got your standard for today. Today, we're just going to repeat the standard from yesterday to develop a model to describe the cycling of matter and the flow of energy among living and non-living parts of an ecosystem. So let me jump down to our activity right here. We're going to watch, you guys are going to watch the instructional video, which is me. And then I'm going to give you at the end a possible lab that you can do if you have the materials. A lot of you guys are freaking your parents out because you may not have this, everything that you need for the lab. And so please understand, anytime I have you guys do a lab and I want you to submit pictures or anything, if you don't have the materials, please don't feel like you have to rush out and get them. Don't do that. I will always show you a result of the lab that I show you so that you can see what I'm trying to demonstrate, and the model that we're trying to create. If you can do it at home, I want you to, because you are missing out on the hands-on activity part of science by being home. So if you can do it, do it. If you can't, it's okay. I will show you what the results are going to be, okay? Regardless of whether or not you do the lab, take a look at number 2. I want you to answer the discussion question before you complete the lab. And if you can't do the lab, you still need to answer the question. I'm going to ask you to predict what you think is going to happen, okay? All right, so let's just do a little bit of review. At the beginning of the week, I asked you guys to create your own food chain. And a food chain is just meant to be a model to show that whole, look back at our standard. We're trying to develop a model to describe the cycling of matter and the flow of energy. And so we do that using a food chain. A food chain will always have a producer that makes its own food, a primary consumer that eats that, and then the flow of energy goes from the producer to the primary consumer. And then a secondary consumer that eats the primary consumer. And then here's the flow of energy. And I didn't require that you guys had a tertiary consumer, but some of you guys did that. So this is Cassie's model. Thank you, Cassie. I'm using it and I appreciate it. But you can see the flow of energy goes from the snake to the eagle. And then when the eagle dies, or when the eagle poops, then that gets broken down even further by a decomposer. And in this case, Cassie used a bacteria. This was a really important part though. The nutrients from the decomposer get deposited into the soil, which goes back to the producer. Producers make their own food through photosynthesis. That's very true, but they also need additional food to kind of supplement that. It's like the more they eat, the more energy they have, right? So that they can do the things that they need to do. And so this whole circling or cycle is a way that we can model the cycle of energy through organisms, through an ecosystem. Okay, so then why do organisms need energy to reproduce? I asked you guys to read an article that talked about the use of energy during specifically one part of an organism's life, and that one part is having to do with reproduction. So yesterday I had you guys look at the sim and compare, what actually happens during reproduction and how does that affect energy. So before they reproduced, here are my little fur bills, and they're reproducing right now. They're just kissing. And you'll notice at this point, I took a screenshot, and the little orange canisters represent the energy storage molecules. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. Before reproduction, these energy storage molecules are full. Each organism has a lot of stored energy. Okay, however, immediately after reproduction, there's a little baby. You'll notice that the stored energy that they used to have, it's decreased. They don't have as much stored energy as they used to have. And according to the article, there's a lot of reasons for that. In order to complete the whole reproduction process, organisms may need to walk or swim long distances. They may need to fight for territory or fight for their mate. They need to provide food and warmth for their offspring. And so each organism is using the stored energy to do the things that it needs to do in order for that reproduction process to occur. So that brings us to our key concept for today. Organisms need to release energy from energy storage molecules in order to reproduce. They have to, all organisms, whether you want to think it's a producer, a primary or secondary consumer, or even a decomposer, they all need to release energy from energy storage molecules in order to reproduce. Okay, so what is an energy storage molecule? Well, energy storage molecules include like sugars, glucose, starch, and they're just what they seem to be. They are a molecule, so a grouping of different atoms that make up these different substances. So this is a starch molecule. There are a lot of atoms in this one, and this is a glucose or a sugar molecule. And there's a third kind of energy storage molecule, and that is a fat molecule. And fat molecules are kind of strange because they're organized in strands. And so this would be a fat storage molecule. Okay, so energy storage molecules are either carbohydrates like sugars or starch, or they're fats. So where do we digest? How do we digest? How do we intake energy storage molecules and use them in our bodies? Well, the first thing I need you guys to remember, and I asked you a question about this in your article reading on Wednesday. I asked you whether eating, or specifically digesting, is a chemical reaction or a physical reaction. And it is definitely a chemical reaction. Here's why. We're taking potential energy. So let's just pretend we've got an apple. That apple, that fruit, has potential energy inside of it. When the apple is sitting on the counter and nobody's eating it, it's just sitting there, that's potential energy. It's not being used at all. But when a person eats that, or an animal eats it, then we're going to take potential energy and we're going to convert it to chemical energy that the organisms can use. In the case of a human being, there's a pathway for that to occur. So first of all, we take a bite of food, any food, and there are digestive enzymes in your saliva, in your salivary glands, in your saliva, and it breaks down specifically carbohydrates, so starches and sugars, okay? So if you take a bite of an apple, there's there's glucose in there. There is sugar in an apple. Bread, rice, cake, cookies, anything with sugar or starch, the enzymes will start to break that down in your mouth as you're chewing the food, okay? What is an enzyme? An enzyme is just a chemical that your body uses to speed up a process. It is meant to hurry along a chemical reaction. Okay, so without your saliva, you could still chew and you'd have a hard time swallowing because it would be dry food going down, but you could take water or whatever and you could chew your food and you could swallow it, but it would not be digested at all. It wouldn't have started to break down at all. And that's an important process because otherwise your body cannot absorb those nutrients. Okay, so we've got food that goes in your mouth, these different salivary glands will excrete saliva. That goes in your mouth. It mixes with the food as you chew it. You start to break it down. You swallow it. And next it goes down into your stomach. And there are acids and enzymes in your stomach that continue to break down the food, especially proteins here. So remember, in your mouth it was carbohydrates. Well, in your stomach it starts to break down the proteins. And your stomach is responsible for churning the food. So you have your food, you've got the acids, you've got the enzymes, and that food is literally churning, it's moving, it's stirring in your stomach. And pretty soon that food is no longer recognizable as food. It's what is called chyme. And chyme is like a wet, broken down, liquidy kind of paste. Listen, you guys have all thrown up before. You know what your food looks like after it's been digested for a little while, after it's been mixed with the stomach acids that's meant to break down the bonds that keep your food together. Once that chyme is ready to go, it will squirt out, for lack of a better word, into the top part here of your small intestine, okay? This is where a lot of the digestion and absorption actually take place, and I'll talk about that in a second. But there are 3 other organs that are kind of a part of your digestive system, and they're kind of a part of another body system. But your liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas are also very important to digestion. So the liver it produces this chemical called bile, and bile will help your body store fat. And we want that because that's our energy storage molecule. If you don't have fat, you don't have potential energy, you don't have stored energy, and you may not have a whole lot of, you may be tired a lot, you may have a lack of energy, you may not be able to do a lot of things that your body just normally wants to do, heal itself, take care of the cells that are damaged. So we definitely need fat, and that bile helps us to store fat efficiently. The gallbladder right here stores the bile as your liver makes it. And then the pancreas right here, this will make an enzyme that will help to digest fat, protein, and more carbohydrates. So the starting of breaking down carbohydrates is here in the mouth with the saliva. We start to digest proteins here in the stomach, and then we continue right here in the small intestines. And you guys can see these little ducts right here. This is where the bile and the enzymes that help to digest fat, protein, and carbs, this is where it gets into the small intestine. And then lastly is your small intestine. And amazingly, 90% of digestion and absorption occur in the small intestine. The small intestine is really long, and it's very important because as the food, chyme, and by this time it's called something else, makes its way through your small intestine, it has these little ridges and bumps, and there's lots of surface area inside your small intestine, and this is where the absorption of those nutrients goes. So as your body eats an apple, it will break it down, or a steak or a pancake or baked potatoes, whatever it is that you eat, breaks it down starting in the mouth, continuing in the stomach, and then continuing even further in the small intestine. And then of course digestion and absorption, well, digestion ends right here, pretty much, okay? If it's not digested and absorbed in your body by this time, it's probably not going to. So your cells will absorb the nutrients, and then what happens? We store that energy as fat until we need to use it. So even if you don't have any fat, let's say you have a diet and you say, I'm not going to eat any fat, but you have a ton of sugar in your diet, you will still store that as whatever your body doesn't need immediately, it will store as fat. And then we use that, or we store it until your body needs to use it, and that's called your energy storage molecules. Okay? So, stored chemical energy, when we need it, it will get converted to kinetic energy, so energy of motion, and thermal energy. You guys, in order for you to talk, eat, think, breathe, sleep, I'm talking with my hands right now because that's what I do. In order for me to do that, I have to have stored chemical energy. I need to have food, and I need that food to be converted to stored chemical energy that can then be converted to kinetic energy and thermal energy. Our bodies are amazing at keeping us warm at our body temperature that we need. How does that happen? We use stored chemical energy and we convert it to thermal energy. That's what helps us to live our lives. It's what's called homeostasis, and it keeps our bodies exactly where we need to be in order to survive. So I've got this picture of the penguin and the mama because I want to talk again about the article that you read and make a connection here. You guys read that in order for penguins to reproduce, they need energy storage molecules. What it's saying is it needs to have stored chemical energy in order to do everything that it needs to do in order to reproduce. Penguins have to walk a long way in order to get from the ocean to where they lay their eggs and where they hatch the babies and the babies grow up. Penguins need to keep warm themselves. Penguins need to keep themselves fed. That requires a lot of energy, and so they need that stored energy that they have. They don't have time to go get something to eat every single day, 3 times a day, so they rely on their stored energy to convert then to the kinetic and thermal energy as they need it. So let's see this in action. This is the experiment that I would like you guys to try, okay? And I'm going to explain it to you. I'm going to do it myself, and I will show you my results on Monday, okay? It was going to be way too big of a video if I did everything today. This is a yeast experiment, and you're going to have 3 cups. You're going to label them A, B, and C. If you don't have plastic cups, you can use regular cups, or you can use bowls, or you can whatever you have handy that works. You're going to need something to stir very lightly. So I've got popsicle sticks in here, but you can use a spoon. We've got plain sugar, and then you've got yeast. And if you go to the store, there's something called rapid rise yeast, and then there's just regular plain yeast. It doesn't matter. You can use either one. You're going to see the results just fine. In each cup, you're going to put yeast in each cup, yeast in warm water, but you're also going to change the one variable that you are changing is the amount of sugar. Now remember, sugar is a source of energy, okay? And in order for an organism to reproduce, they need to have energy. So in cup A, you're not going to add any sugar. It's just going to be the yeast and water, and that's it. In cup B, you're going to put just a little pinch. So just put your finger and your thumb in there, put a little pinch in there, and that's it. And then in cup C, you're going to put 1 teaspoon of sugar. And then you're going to add about 40 milliliters of warm water. I'm going to let you guys check to see, do a quick conversion. 40, if you don't, normally we would be using the graduated cylinder. And you guys can just look on Google and type in a conversion, 40 milliliters equals how many cups, and it will tell you. I'm not telling you now because I want you guys to go out and look for that information. And you've also got 1 tablespoon of yeast in each cup. So remember, we've got a teaspoon of sugar in cup C and then a tablespoon of yeast in A, B, and C. You're going to stir them just until it's wet. Don't stir them really, really hard. And then set them aside. Now, this is going to take probably about 10-15 minutes in order for this experiment to work its way out. So be sure that you just leave it alone for a second, okay? So then, a couple things I want you to know so that you can make a prediction. When organisms, like I said, we convert stored energy, which is also called potential energy, into kinetic and thermal energy for our life processes. When yeast converts stored energy or potential energy into kinetic and thermal energy, it is a chemical reaction. It's a chemical reaction for all of us, okay? But for yeast, we have a way of identifying that this is a chemical reaction because yeast will produce carbon dioxide gas. And we see that in the production of the bubbles. So knowing that it should be bubbling, that's what you want to see in your cups. I want you to make a prediction. What do you think will happen to the yeast in cups A, B, and C? Do you think it'll all be the same? Or do you think because we've got different amounts of sugar, will that make a difference? I want you guys to think about that and make your prediction in your discussion thread in today's folder. Okay? All right, you guys, have a great day, and I will see you on Monday.